does it really blow ass?
Well, the Force is once again with us. We thought the saga was complete, but just a decade after the last Star Wars film, the franchise is about to awaken once more. I'd like to say I'm sharing the fanbase's enthusiasm, but in all honesty, the fanbase kind of rubs me the wrong way. Mainly, I just feel the hardcore Star Wars nerds are just going to pick apart this new one and bitch nonstop, considering they're still moaning and bitching about the goddamn prequels for over a decade. And it just bleeds over and tarnishes everything for me. Seriously! Even when looking at an article as innocuous as announcing all 6 movies are available for digital download, you get whiny comments such as, "There's 6 movies? You mean 3 classics and 3 unwatchable crap fests?" This years-long bitch fest is more jarring than any missteps in the prequel trilogy could ever be. The ironic thing, though, is that I kinda do agree with the detractors. I do feel that episodes 2 and 3 are the weakest entries in the series, mostly because of how they sort of felt like CGI whorefests and Hayden Christensen's wooden, stilted acting.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth.
Plus, a CGI Yoda? What in the name of an Ewok's crusty ass fur is this? It should have been CGI for his fight scenes, puppet for everything else. But what about Episode 1, the prequel that gets the most hate by far? Well, since we're starting a new trilogy, perhaps it's time to take another look at the start of the last one. Let's start with the opening crawl, which explains how tax and trade disputes have spiraled out of control. A lot of critics still bitch about that, as if such concerns have no place in a Star Wars movie, never mind that we're exploring what went on when the Republic was still around. And did it really bog down the movie that much? I mean, even with the backdrop of ambassadors coming to negotiate over a trade blockade or whatever, the action started up pretty damn fast. A ship getting blown to smithereens, and a younger Obi-Wan giving us a glimpse of just why Jedi in the old days were viewed with such awe. Sometimes a movie calls for slow build-up, and sometimes you need something to hook you right away. This is a clear case of the latter, and damn, it's still satisfying. That was genuinely how I felt back then, but when I first saw it in 1999, I felt it got bogged down in the middle thanks to the pod race, leading to what I now call an Episode 1 moment. Now this may not mean what you think. Right before the actual pod race, I really was thinking, geez, this sucks like those things in that asteroid worm. Maybe I should get out of here. But I stuck with it, and once things started to veer toward going back to Naboo, everything changed in my eyes. Everything started falling into place just as George Lucas intended, and I ended up not only loving the film as a whole, but I mostly forgave the bits where it was bogged down before. And that's why I still consider The Phantom Menace the second best movie in the series. Yes, I said that. The second best film in the series. And all the arguments I've heard in the 16 years since about why I should loathe this thing as much as the old Ewok cartoon or whatever, none make any sense. Let's just get the biggest one out of the way now. Most arguments against this film boil down to foaming at the mouth while railing on this guy. And my response is always a disinterested shrug and insouciantly asking, so? Jar Jar Binks never bothered me as a character. Never. Not even once. In fact, looking back, that part with the pod repairs actually strikes me as slightly amusing. But if you really want an example of forced, pointless gag scenes, look no further than that bit with 3PO in Episode 2.
There's been some terrible mistake!
Jar Jar's not the most well-envisioned character in the franchise, to be sure, but I never found Jar Jar overly intrusive. He never looked out of place with the rest of the main cast, and like it or not, he had some importance in the overall plot, being our link to a new race introduced, the Gungans.
Jar Jar Binks.
Lisa, Your Highness?
Yes. I need your help.
So whenever I watch it, I just roll with it and let Jar Jar's tomfoolery roll off my back. Which is why I find the 16-year-long PMSing session about this character far more annoying than any Gungan could ever be. To the point where, when I learned that the Clone Wars TV show had some episodes with Jar Jar as the focus, even getting mistaken for a Jedi at one point, I grinned in delight, a poke in the eye of all the fans that won't shut up. So yeah, I'll always have Jar Jar's back, because I know he'd have mine. He's far more useful than some other Star Wars characters, like Boba Fett. Why is that? When Jar Jar screws up in battle, he takes out some droids for you. When Fett screws up in battle, he gets swallowed up by the Sarlacc pit. Yeah, way to watch your six, Boba Fett. What's another common complaint about Phantom Menace, character-wise? Oh yeah, Kid Anakin. First off, all the problems I can see here are quite common with child actors in general, and the whole thing with him coming off as too pure and innocent, that was the point! To make his eventual fall even more devastating. Sure, you can argue that Lucas overplayed it with his script, but it was still necessary to set up how this optimistic little kid would eventually be plagued with doubt and self-loathing. As for being hard to visualize this kid growing up into Darth Vader, well, watching the pod race scene again, Anakin either had this aloof, just-a-job look about him, or looked anxious yet determined. It made it even easier to think, yeah, this kid grows up to be the guy that leads TIE fighters into the Death Star trench. Then there's the complaint of there not being enough of Darth Maul. To that I say, that's a plus. Outside of the double-ended lightsaber, there wasn't much about this guy that interested me. I never cared or wondered where he came from. Believe it or not, I was more curious about Jar Jar's past. What were the actual circumstances behind his banishment? How close was he to Big Boss Nass before that? Gungan religion is mentioned a lot. What's it like? And when it comes to minor villains in the prequels, I was far more impressed with General Grievous. He's one of the prime examples of an 100% CGI character done right. And there's also, can't believe I'm saying this, Jango Fett. Because, unlike the clone child he spawned, he actually does stuff. What else? Oh yeah, the midichlorians. I always hear about how revealing how Jedis can use the Force ruin the mystery or whatever. Ugh, every time I hear that, I kinda hear Insane Clown Posse singing about fucking magnets, how do they work? How did this ruin the mystery? We always knew the ability to use the Force is an inherited trait, but instead of going the purely genetics route like Harry Potter and X-Men, Star Wars goes further and brings in symbiotic microbes, which I thought was rather clever. As far as I'm concerned, it made the whole basis of Jedi powers more intriguing, not less. As for why I prefer Phantom Menace to the other two prequels, there's a couple of reasons for that. First off, this goes back to the overabundance of CGI in the other two. Here, yeah, you know there's CGI, but it doesn't seem so ostentatious. Another thing is the aim of the storytelling. Looking back, 2 and 3 seem laser-focused on setting the stage for the original trilogy, and not as focused on giving us new locales, races, and other goodness to expand the Star Wars universe with. In Phantom Menace, it felt more about telling a self-contained story, providing a new world and 2 new races, while still setting into motion the events that lead to what we know is to come. In fact, when I finished watching Phantom Menace in 1999, my overall view of the franchise improved rather than being soured. Just for that reason. It made me realize just how dangerous a villain the Emperor really was, a sociopathic chess master who was playing the long game. Whether or not Amidala took back their world, it was of no consequence. reasons. It was all to get himself elected Supreme Chancellor, simply the first step in his plan. As much as I still enjoy this movie, I do have some criticisms. A personal one for me, and in fact holds true for all the prequels, is that the vehicles introduced here aren't as memorable or as iconic as the stuff from the original trilogy. The Naboo fighters and the cruiser, the Trade Federation stations, none of it sticks in your mind's eye like the Death Star, the X-Wings, the AT-STs, or the Millennium Falcon. Also, the whole thing with this prophecy about the Force's future felt far too generic and vague in my opinion. And again, it does drag somewhat in the middle, thanks mostly to the build-up to the pod race scene. So yes, Phantom Menace has flaws, but their flaws I can live with. Is this me being stubborn, refusing to change my stance even after 16 years? Misa don't think so. I used to consider Empire Strikes Back one of the weaker entries as well, but after listening to the opinions of others in recent years, especially that of fellow YouTuber NecroVMX, I've changed my outlook. It's moved up on the list. But Phantom Menace still sits pretty at number 2. I said number 2. With Return of the Jedi at the top of the heap. Yeah, Return of the Jedi is the one I consider the most satisfying and fun. Maybe that's why I liked Phantom Menace so much. Return of the Jedi deftly wrapped up George Lucas's saga, giving us a huge battle on multiple fronts at the end. Speaking of which, those who also address criticisms about the Gungans, but by pointing to the Ewoks and how they also appeal to kids, perhaps not the best argument, because you don't fuck with Ewoks, baby. You're basically saying Gungans are only slightly less awesome than these furfucks coming at you like bats out of hell, hijacking AT-STs, pilfering stormtrooper weapons, and just mowing down Imperial forces left and right. Anyway, the point is, Phantom Menace serves as a beginning to the story that culminated in a similar multi-front effort that had me smiling giddily. It was fun in 1999, and it's still fun now. You probably don't agree with even half of what I've said, and that's cool. Besides, it's time to look ahead. The prequel trilogy is now in the rearview mirror, and George Lucas has no more stories to share on film about that galaxy far, far away. We're going in a new direction, so when the Force finally awakens in our multiplexes, perhaps we can hold off on the venom spewed online, stop nitpicking about what came before, and look toward the franchise's future with a new hope.